My wife cheated on me with our accountant, stole $250, $0 from our joint account, and now she's claiming half the property. Except I just found out she's secretly been planning to leave me for her lawyer, who's been manipulating both of us the entire time. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this, honestly. It's like some twisted soap opera, but it's real life, and now I'm sitting here trying to piece it all together. The craziest part. The moment I discovered everything wasn't just a gut feeling or some suspicion. No, it was a series of events that seemed so small at first but turned out to be the biggest betrayal I've ever experienced. My wife Lisa and I had been together for over 10 years. We met in college, got married right after, built a life, a business, a house, the usual American dream. She's always been a bit bitchy, sharp-tongued, quick to lie when it suited her, but I never thought she'd go this far. She's always had a way of making herself look innocent, even when she's clearly up to something. But I guess I was blind, or maybe I just didn't want to see the signs. It started a few months ago. Little things, missing money from our joint account which we used for everything, house expenses, vacations, investments. Nothing huge at first, just a few hundred here, 1,000 there. I figured it was some mistake or maybe she was spending more than usual. But then I noticed the pattern. The transfers were coming from her phone, and she'd be oddly defensive when I asked about it. One day, I decided to check the bank statements myself. I've always been cautious with our money, but I never imagined I'd find what I did. There was a transfer of $250, $0, half of our joint savings, made to an account I'd never seen before. My stomach dropped. I did a quick search, and sure enough, that account belonged to our accountant, Mark. That's when I started to get suspicious. Why would our accountant be involved in this? How did she even know him? I started digging deeper. I looked through our emails, her texts, her social media. She'd been acting weird lately, more secretive, avoiding my questions, making excuses when I'd bring up money or plans. I caught her deleting messages on her phone more than once. She'd get defensive if I asked about her whereabouts during the day, claiming she was busy with work. But I knew better. The worst part, I caught her in a lie about the accountant. She told me she'd just met him through work, that he was a professional and she was just doing her job. But I found emails where she called him the best lawyer I've ever met, and she'd been texting him late into the night. That's when I realized this wasn't just about money, it was about her having an affair and probably more than that. One night I decided to confront her. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I waited until she was in the bedroom, scrolling through her phone like nothing was wrong. I took a deep breath and asked her directly, "Lisa, I know about Mark. I know you've been cheating on me with him. I know about the money, the affair, everything." Her face froze for a second, then she burst out laughing, like I'd just told her a joke. "What are you talking about? You're crazy. You don't have any proof. You're just paranoid." But I had plenty. The bank statements, the texts, the emails. I laid it all out on the table. She looked stunned for a moment, then her mask slipped and she got mad. "You're overreacting," she spat. "You always accuse me of stuff, but I'm not cheating. It's just work, just business. You're making a huge deal out of nothing." She then started to cry, but it was fake tears. She's a master at manipulation. She told me I was paranoid, that I was ruining our marriage over nothing. But I knew better. I saw the lies in her eyes. That night I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. I couldn't sleep. The woman I had trusted, the woman I built my life with, had been lying to me for months. She was having sex with our accountant, stealing from our joint account, and planning who knows what next. It was like waking up in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I kept asking myself, how could she do this? How did I miss all the signs? And the worst part, what now? That's when I started to think about revenge, about how to make her pay for what she's done. Not just for the money, but for the betrayal. This wasn't just about infidelity. It was about trust, respect, and the life we built. I knew I had to act fast, but I also knew I had to be careful. She was manipulative, cunning, and now I was realizing she had been planning her exit all along, probably with the lawyer she's been texting, who, by the way, is a real piece of work himself. I didn't tell her I knew everything right away. I needed time to gather my thoughts, to figure out my next move. But I also started to dig into her finances more, looking for any other hidden accounts or secrets. The more I uncovered, the more I realized she'd been planning her escape for a while. This wasn't just a fling, it was a full-blown scheme. So here I am trying to figure out my next step. Do I confront her again? Do I threaten to take everything? Do I just walk away with what's mine? The betrayal runs deep, and I can't shake the feeling that this is only the beginning. I can't believe I ever trusted her, and honestly, I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust anyone again. After that night, everything changed. I couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. The shock was like a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. I kept replaying the moments, the way she lied so effortlessly, how she looked at me with those fake tears, trying to manipulate me into believing she's innocent. But I knew better now. I had proof. I had everything I needed to blow this whole thing apart. The next morning, I decided I had to get my ducks in a row. I couldn't just confront her again and hope she'd come clean. I needed a plan. First, I called a lawyer, someone I trusted, someone who knew the ins and outs of financial crimes and divorce law. I knew I had to be cautious. This wasn't just about catching her in a lie. It was about protecting what was mine and making sure she didn't walk away with a dime more than she deserved. I started by pulling all the financial documents I could find. Bank statements, tax returns, emails, texts, everything. I even checked her phone when she wasn't looking, digging through her messages. That's when I saw the messages between her and Mark, the accountant. They'd been sexting, talking about their future, planning to leave everything behind. It was sickening. She was convincing herself she was doing nothing wrong, that she deserved more, that I was just a fool who didn't see it coming. I also found out she'd been secretly transferring money into accounts she'd hidden from me. I knew she had a lawyer, her lawyer actually, a guy named David. She'd been planning to leave me for him, I was sure of it now. She'd even been talking about splitting the property, claiming she was entitled to half because of contributions, even though she hadn't worked a day in her life outside the house. She was trying to play the victim, but I could see through it all. I decided to set a trap. I told her I was going to meet with the lawyer, David, to discuss the property and our future. She freaked out when I said that, acting all panicked, trying to convince me I was overreacting. But I knew she was lying. I had her caught in her own web. I told her I'd be recording everything just in case, and she looked even more panicked. That's when I saw her start to crack. She was trying to keep her composure, but her hands trembled, her voice quivered. She knew I was onto her. I kept my composure, playing it cool, pretending I was still clueless. I secretly installed a recording app on my phone just in case I needed proof later. I also scheduled a meeting with David, the lawyer, to confirm what I already suspected. She was planning to leave me, take everything, and start fresh with him. The thought made me furious. How could she do this? How could she betray everything we built? Meanwhile, I started to document everything. I took screenshots of the transfers, saved the emails, recorded her conversations. I wanted everything in case I needed to fight her in court or confront her publicly. I also decided to hire a private investigator to follow her around. If she was planning her escape, I needed to know where she was going, who she was meeting, and what her next move was. I wasn't going to let her get away with this without a fight. The emotional toll was brutal. I felt betrayed, humiliated, angry, every possible emotion wrapped into one. I'd loved her, trusted her more than anyone, and now I was questioning everything. I couldn't believe she'd been lying to my face, cheating, stealing, and planning her exit right under my nose. It was like waking up in a nightmare that I couldn't wake from. My mind kept circling around the same questions. How long has she been planning this? How much has she taken? And most of all, how do I stop her? I kept reminding myself I had to stay calm. Reacting emotionally would only play into her hands. I needed to be strategic. The lawyer I spoke to confirmed what I suspected. There was enough evidence to challenge her claims about the property, and I was within my rights to protect my assets. I also learned that she'd been seeing David for months, secretly meeting him during work trips and weekends. She convinced herself she was untouchable, that she could manipulate her way out of this mess and walk away with everything. That's when I decided I'd had enough. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me any longer. I started preparing for a legal battle. I knew she'd try to spin it as me being paranoid, but I had the proof. The texts, the emails, the transfers, all of it. I was going to fight for what's mine, for the house, for our savings, for my dignity. I also started planning how I'd confront her again, this time with everything laid out on the table, no more lies, no more games. She still didn't know I was recording her, but I could see the cracks forming. She was starting to realize I wasn't the naive, trusting husband she thought I was. I could tell she was getting nervous, maybe even scared. That's when I realized. I had her cornered and I was ready to strike. I didn't want to ruin her, but I also wasn't going to let her ruin me. This was war, and I was prepared to fight for every penny, every ounce of respect I had left. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became that Lisa's plans were far more elaborate than I initially thought. She wasn't just cheating or stealing a chunk of money. She was orchestrating her escape with the precision of a criminal. Every step she'd taken, from the secret transfers to her clandestine meetings with David, pointed to a carefully laid-out scheme to leave me high and dry. I started to dig into her phone more aggressively. I knew I had to be careful. She was sneaky, and I didn't want her to catch me in the act. So I installed a hidden app that allowed me to monitor her texts, calls, and emails without her suspicion. It was a risky move, but I needed the evidence. I also bought a cheap voice recorder and placed it in the living room, hoping to catch her talking about her plans when she thought I wasn't listening. What I found was shocking. She'd been telling her friends she was done with the loser, and how she was finally going to start her new life with David. She'd even mentioned how she was taking everything, including the house, the savings, and the business we'd built together. She convinced herself that I was a fool, that I'd never figure out what she was doing. But I knew better now. One afternoon, I caught her on a call with David. I managed to record the entire conversation. She was laying out her plan, how she'd fake a fight, get me to sign some papers, and then leave with everything. She was even talking about dividing the property fairly, but I could tell from her tone that she didn't plan to give me a damn thing. She was ruthless, and she was convinced she could get away with it. With all this evidence piling up, I booked an emergency meeting with my lawyer. I explained everything, her affair, the money she'd stolen, her plans to leave. The lawyer was shocked but also impressed with how much I'd already uncovered. He told me I had a strong case to contest her claims for half the property, especially since I could prove her intentions to leave and the financial fraud. Meanwhile, I decided to confront her directly again. I told her I knew about her meeting with David, about the transfers, everything. Her reaction was priceless. She went from confident to panicked in seconds. She started denying everything, throwing out lies like, "I don't know what you're talking about. You're paranoid. This is all your imagination." But I had her on tape. I played the recording for her, watching her face turn pale. That's when she snapped. She started yelling, calling me crazy, possessive, and jealous. She claimed I was controlling and paranoid, and that I was just trying to ruin her life. She said she loved me but needed freedom, and that I was holding her back. I was furious. I told her that her freedom came at the expense of our marriage, our savings, and her own integrity. She looked desperate, like she'd been caught in a lie she couldn't wiggle out of. At that point, I knew I had to take serious action. I told her I was going to freeze all her accounts, prevent her from taking any more money, and file for an immediate divorce. I also warned her that I'd go to the authorities if I found out she'd been stealing or planning to flee with our assets. She tried to manipulate me one last time, crying and begging, claiming she was doing this for herself, that she deserved happiness, and that I was holding her hostage. But I wasn't about to let her manipulate me anymore. I had everything I needed: her texts, her emails, recordings, bank statements. I had the law on my side. I told her she could try to spin her story any way she wanted. But the truth was out, and I was going to fight for what was rightfully mine. I felt a strange mixture of relief and anger. Relief that I finally saw her for what she was, and anger that I'd been so blind for so long. Now I was preparing for the next phase: legal action. I contacted a forensic accountant to trace all the stolen money, to see if she'd hidden more accounts or assets. I knew she'd be trying to hide her tracks, but I was determined to find every last dollar. I also started preparing a detailed timeline of her lies and manipulations, knowing this would be crucial if it came to a court battle. The emotional toll was heavy. Every day I felt a mix of betrayal and resolve. I couldn't believe I married someone capable of this level of deception, of betrayal. But I also knew I had to stay strong for myself, for my future, for the life I still wanted to rebuild. I kept telling myself I was not the fool she thought I was. I was going to fight for what was mine and make her regret every lie, every betrayal, every stolen dollar. The more I dug into her financial mess, the more I realized how far she'd gone to cover her tracks. She'd opened secret accounts, transferred money overseas, even tried to set up a shell company under a fake name. I found emails where she was coordinating with a shady accountant friend of hers, trying to hide the money in offshore accounts. The woman was a master at lying, but her web of deception was starting to unravel completely. I knew I couldn't confront her directly again without risking her destroying what little evidence I had left. Instead, I had to be strategic. I contacted a private investigator I found through a recommendation. I needed eyes on her, someone who could tell me where she was going, who she was meeting, and if she was trying to run. The investigator started tailing her discreetly, and what I found out was even more infuriating. She was meeting with David, her lawyer, in secret. Not just for legal advice, she was planning her escape. I saw her sneaking out of the house late at night, meeting him at various hotels and even trying to meet with Mark, our accountant. It was clear she was orchestrating her exit, and she thought she was so clever about it. But I had everything on tape now. Every meeting, every secret call, every lie. I also learned she'd been trying to sell the house quietly without telling me. I was furious. That house was our home, and she was trying to cash out on it without my knowledge. I couldn't let her do that. So I moved quickly, filing for an emergency freeze on our assets and putting a hold on the property sale. I also contacted the bank to flag all suspicious transfers and set up alerts for any large withdrawals or transfers. I was determined to stop her before she could vanish with everything. Meanwhile, I kept pushing my lawyer to prepare for court. I had enough evidence to challenge her claims for half the property, especially since I could prove her plans to leave and the fraud involved in the money transfer. I told her lawyer about the offshore accounts, the secret meetings, and the illegal transfers. He was impressed with how much I'd uncovered and assured me that I had a strong case. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about trust, something she had completely destroyed. I found myself waking up every morning feeling sick, angry, betrayed. I couldn't believe I'd been so blind for so many years, trusting her with everything. It felt like my entire life was falling apart, piece by piece. Every time I thought I'd hit rock bottom, something new came up. Another lie, another betrayal, another way she was trying to screw me over. I started to think about what I really wanted. Part of me wanted to fight for her, to somehow salvage what was left of our marriage, but the bigger part knew that was impossible now. She'd been planning her escape for months, maybe even longer. Her betrayal was complete. I realized I had no choice but to cut her out, protect what was mine, and move on. I also made a decision. I wouldn't let her get away with this. If she thought she could steal my life and walk away, she was dead wrong. I had the evidence, I had the law, and I had the willpower. I was going to fight her in court, expose her lies, and take back what was rightfully mine. I even started thinking about how I'd rebuild my life afterward, better, stronger, smarter. The emotional toll was brutal. Every day was a rage, despair, determination. I'd loved her once, and now I hated what she'd become. I'd trusted her with everything, and she'd thrown it all away for some affair, some quick cash, and her own selfish desires. The pain of betrayal was like a wound that wouldn't heal. But I knew I had to stay strong for myself, for my future, for the truth. No matter how much she lied, I had the evidence, and I was ready to use it. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about justice, about reclaiming my life from the woman who betrayed me in the worst way imaginable. By now, I'd spent weeks gathering every shred of evidence I could find. The recordings, the bank statements, the emails, everything pointed to her orchestrated plan to leave me high and dry. I knew she was planning to run, maybe even try to take the house, the savings, and her reputation with her. I couldn't let that happen. I had to act fast. I contacted my lawyer again and laid out the latest findings. We drafted a cease and desist order to freeze all her accounts and prevent her from selling the house or transferring any more assets. I also pushed for an injunction to keep her from leaving the state with any of our property. The lawyer agreed that I had a solid case, especially with the evidence I'd collected. I could see her plans crumbling, and that made me feel a strange sense of relief, like finally taking control of the situation. Meanwhile, I kept the private investigator on her tail. He reported that she was increasingly anxious, meeting with David more frequently, and trying to hide her phone and emails. I knew she was panicking, realizing that her carefully crafted plans were about to blow up in her face. I also discovered she'd contacted a real estate agent, trying to sell the house quietly, but with all the legal holds in place, that was impossible now. The emotional toll was intense. I'd gone from feeling numb to furious, then to a strange sense of clarity. I kept telling myself I wasn't the fool she thought I was. I'd been blinded for years, but now I saw everything clearly. The woman I loved turned out to be a manipulative liar who was willing to destroy our life for her own selfish gain. That realization hurt more than anything. It felt like my heart was breaking, but I knew I had to stay strong, not just for me, but for the truth. One night, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I called her into the living room and laid out everything I knew, her plans, her lies, her secret meetings. I played her the recordings, showed her the bank statements, and told her I was done playing her game. I told her I was filing for divorce immediately and that I was going to take back every dollar she stole and every lie she told. Her face twisted with anger and desperation. She tried to deny everything, claiming I was crazy, paranoid, and suspicious. But I had the proof. I had her on tape and she knew it. That's when she lost her temper. She started yelling, claiming I was ruining her life, that I was controlling and jealous. She said she loved me but needed freedom, that I was holding her hostage. I looked at her and realized how far gone she was. She'd convinced herself that her lies and manipulations were justified, but I wasn't buying it anymore. I told her she'd crossed every line and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I made it clear I was going to fight for the house, the savings, and my reputation. I told her I'd see her in court, and I'd make sure she paid for every lie, every dollar stolen, and every betrayal. She looked like a cornered animal, and I knew I'd hit her where it hurt. I wasn't just doing this for myself. I was doing it to expose her, to make sure she couldn't manipulate her way out of this. In the days that followed, I finalized the legal filings. The court granted my temporary orders to freeze her assets and prevent her from leaving the state with any of our property. I also filed for divorce on the grounds of infidelity, fraud, and financial misconduct. I felt a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion. For so long, I'd been a victim of her lies, but now I was taking back control. I also started to think about the aftermath. How do I rebuild after this? How do I trust again? The truth is, I don't know. What I do know is that I'll never let anyone manipulate me like that again. I've learned that trust has to be earned, and sometimes you have to fight tooth and nail to protect what's yours. The betrayal cuts deep, but I refuse to let it define me. I'm already planning my next steps, getting my finances in order, focusing on my mental health, and making sure I never get like this again. I'll come out of this stronger, more cautious, and more aware of who I can and can't trust. And I'll make damn sure she pays for what she did, whether in court, in life, or in her own conscience. The truth always comes out, and now I'm finally on the right side of it. In the end, everything I thought I knew about my marriage turned out to be a lie. The woman I loved, the partner I trusted, had been planning her escape for months, probably longer, while I was clueless, working, dreaming of our future. The betrayal cut so deep it felt like my heart was shattered into 1,000 pieces, each one reflecting a different lie she told me, a secret she kept. But despite all the pain, I knew I had to pick up the pieces and move forward. The legal battle is ongoing, and I won't pretend it's easy. Every day, I wake up with a mix of anger, sadness, and determination. It's hard not to dwell on what I lost, years of my life, my trust, my sense of security. but I remind myself that I'm better off without her deceit. I've learned a hard lesson about trust, about how appearances can be deceiving, and about the importance of being cautious with the people you let into your life. Looking back, I see how she manipulated everyone around her, her friends, her lawyer, even me, thinking she was untouchable. She thought she could have her affair, steal the money, and walk away without consequences. But I made sure she couldn't. The evidence I gathered was overwhelming, and I was prepared to fight for every cent, every bit of respect I had left. I don't regret standing up for myself, even if the process was brutal. Now, I focus on rebuilding my life. I've started seeing a therapist to work through the emotional scars, and I've taken steps to secure my finances better, setting up alerts, closing accounts, and making sure no one can do this to me again. I've also been cautious about trusting new people, realizing that not everyone has good intentions. It's a tough lesson, but one I refuse to forget. Most importantly, I've learned that sometimes you have to be your own hero. No one else is coming to save you from betrayal, no matter how much you want to believe in the good in people. You have to fight for yourself, protect what's yours, and never let anyone manipulate or lie their way into your life again. It's a painful process, but it's also a necessary one. In the end, I'm grateful I found out when I did. If I hadn't, she might have taken everything: our house, our savings, my peace of mind, without a second thought. Now I walk away with a clearer understanding of who she was and, most importantly, who I am. Stronger, wiser, and more cautious. I may have lost a lot, but I gained clarity and the resolve to never let myself be again. That's the real lesson I'll carry forward. Trust must be earned, and betrayal will always be exposed sooner or later. The truth, no matter how painful, always comes out in the end.